Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. I am here, as always, your host, Tommy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
All right. Made it through 3 days of draft. However many, what was that, like 15 hours of TV?
Yeah, we're
Watching
really
draft
suffering over
picks.
here watching 15 hours of TV. It's the ultimate challenge, but we are here to do it
We
for
are
you,
here to
good
do it so you
listeners.
don't have to.
Oh, yes. We're making the big sacrifices out here watching 15 hours of NFL Network. More, honestly. I think
Yeah, it's probably more.
it's closer to like 18, I think. But we are here after the NFL draft. Packers got some good players. Packers got some maybe good players. We'll talk about all of them in the coming weeks. We will be doing a few players each episode over the course of the next few weeks, talking a little bit in depth about each of the players the Packers selected. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the draft as a whole, and then we're going to be breaking down Lukas Van Ness, the Packers' first pick. But before we get into all of that, just a couple of quick pitches. If you enjoy what you heard, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. That's where we post whenever we have a new episode to listen to. Any articles we find interesting, or our takes on players, our takes on Packers news, etc., etc., etc. So come give us a follow there at Father Son Packer, and give us a subscribe. Hit that subscribe button on any podcast platforms you are using: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We even put our episodes out on YouTube. Those would all really help our numbers, so we'd appreciate it. But Dad, anything else there before we get into the draft? Oh, there is one piece of news though. We need to talk a little bit about Jordan Love's fifth-year option.
Yeah, we actually have some waiting for news, as it were. They have not actually exercised Love's option yet. The deadline is tomorrow, Tuesday, May 2nd, from the time we're recording this. And they haven't announced their intentions. Per Gutekunst, he said in the Saturday presser, it's a lot of money for a guy who hasn't played, but at the same time, obviously, we're moving forward with him, so we'll figure that out by Tuesday. He also says, well, we're really focused on the drafts. Like, how do you not already know what you're doing?
I'm
This is
sure he
like,
does.
but it's just weird not to have decided this weeks ago and actually be willing to say it out loud.
I'm sure he does, and I'm sure he just doesn't want to tell us. Because
for reasons.
Well, here's what I think. I mean, if you want my 2 cents, I'd imagine that they are exploring the idea of giving him like a smaller short-term contract, like a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal at
Clock's ticking.
at some kind of lower rate that would be lower than either the franchise tag or the fifth-year option, but would provide a little more security. That would be my guess. I know a lot of people have speculated on that as well, that that's what they're aiming to do.
Yeah, I have a feeling I know what his agent's answer is to that.
I mean, there are positives for Jordan Love there as well.
If they give him a multi-year, that's a real
That's what I'm.
guarantee.
That's what I'm saying. 2 years, like 30 million. 2 years, 40 million, like something like that, where it's like very safe money for Jordan Love. If something were to happen this year, God forbid he gets hurt, knock on wood that doesn't happen, like he would have some security. There are positives to Jordan Love for this as well. It's whether or not he wants to like gamble essentially on like, hey, I'm definitely going to earn a long-term contract here.
Yeah, it would be taking something well below market value if he does.
Well, it would be taking something more stable, lower than
Well,
if
it's
he plays
both.
lower than if he plays well, much higher than if he plays bad.
I mean, how well does he have to play to get more than that if you look at the league?
Well, if we're going to hypothetical scenarios, if he gets hurt, that's an entirely different
That's an
conversation.
entirely different thing.
That's what I'm saying. It gives you some safety cushion there.
Well, then they'd have to be willing to guarantee more than that 20 million total because that's guaranteed. So if it's 30, then it has to be like 25 of it guaranteed. If
Well,
it's
here's
because
what
of
here's what
injury.
I'm saying. They go to his agent, and I am literally paraphrasing something I heard. Goodness, I want to say could have been Andy Herman. It might have been Justin Mosqueda. They were saying something very similar to this. I don't want to pretend like I'm biting off of them, but essentially they're saying it's like, hey, we're not gonna take your option, but here's what's on the table. Here's a nice 2-year, 20 mil a year, but we're not taking the option. This is safe. If you think you're going to be really good this coming year, like we'll like play that out. Totally fine with that, but we're not picking up the option. But here's this other thing on the table.
I guess it'd be dependent on how much of it is actually guaranteed.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think they should give him the option for what it's worth. I'm just positing scenarios because I think, at this point, let's give him a little confidence, like just a little
Yes, like
confidence.
you've already decided to move on to Love, which is kind of crazy that they're still thinking this. But on the other side, the fewest games started for a QB to get the fifth year option picked up since it began in like 2011 is Patrick Mahomes with 31 games started. The second fewest is Tua with 34 games started, and the third fewest is RG3, Robert Griffin III, with 35 started. Jordan Love has had precisely one game started so far.
Setting records, baby. Yeah, that's a bit of a gap. If you looked at a distribution, that would be very far to the
way
left.
Out of the tail.
Oh man, no, that's a really good pull. I didn't realize 31 was the least ever for someone picking up.
That was year. I caught that watching a clip from I should ESPN. I think it's ESPN. Schefter was on it when he was talking about and then somebody put up the graphic on the screen about that. That's where I got that little nugget.
It's interesting. It's important to note the fifth year option's only been a thing for like the last
12 years, like a
15,
dozen years.
Yeah, 15 years. So it's not like the entirety of NFL history, but it's a good sample size. But that's definitely something that the Packers are going to have to think about. I feel more so that they should pick it up just as like a gesture of goodwill and a vote of confidence because give them some confidence.
In the grand scheme of things for quarterback salary.
Well, here's the thing. Can I say one more thing?
Money.
Yeah. And if he's bad, they're going to have some money to they're going to be bad the next year and the money I don't think is really going to matter. Like they're going to have some spare money. They're not going to be building a contender strapped for cash.
$20 million is something they can manage.
Yeah.
Because then if he's bad, then they don't have a quarterback ready for 2024 either. And so they're going to be bad again.
Sean Clifford.
That $20 million on the books doesn't matter.
Well, anyway, Dab, we just talked a little bit about Jordan Love here. Keep your eyes peeled tomorrow. That's when the Packers have to make that decision on the fifth-year option. I feel like if they were going to do it...
4 Eastern, I think, because the NFL league offices head to the bars early.
They must.
In New York City.
Because it's kind of crazy how early these deadlines are. But I think if they were... I'm a little worried that if they were going to do it, they would have already done it. So I don't think they're going to offer it. Is my guess. But keep an eye on Twitter tomorrow. We'll be tweeting out through when those decisions are made. But Dad, let's get on to talk about the draft because that's what we're really here for. And we're going to start with just a brief overview of the draft itself, talking a little bit about the Packers process, talking a little bit about the players the Packers picked, more so about positions and general philosophy than individual players, because we are going to dive a little deeper into each of these individual players in the coming weeks in our episodes. Come give us a follow on Twitter if you want to be updated about when those episodes are being dropped. We will talk about Lukas Van Ness in the second half of today's podcast as well. And so the next one's going to be, I think, Musgrave and Kraft. Even though Reed was picked first, we just want to do the tight ends together. And we'll figure it out from there. But for the draft as a whole, Dad, the Packers took 13 players. I'm just going to read them off really quick, and then we'll go through a little bit about philosophy, et cetera, et cetera. But the Packers ended up with 13 picks, like I said. They took Lukas Van Ness, edge rusher out of Iowa, Luke Musgrave, tight end out of Oregon State, Jaden Reed, wide receiver out of Michigan State, Tucker Kraft, tight end out of South Dakota State, Colby Wooden, D-tackle edge out of Auburn, Sean Clifford, quarterback out of Penn State, Dontavian Wicks, wide receiver out of Virginia, Carl Brooks, D-tackle out of Bowling Green, Anders Carlson, kicker out of Auburn, Carrington Valentine, corner out of Kentucky, Lou Nichols III, running back out of Central Michigan, Anthony Johnson Jr., safety out of Iowa State, and Grant DuBose, wide receiver out of Charlotte. And they traded back 2 times in this draft and did not trade up, and those picks were all from this class, so nothing really impacting future drafts. Whew. That was 13 players. Quite the list. 13
players, and interesting twist is they've now hit the Dakotas 2 years in a row. First the North and then the South.
Yep, both Dakotas. They got 2 guys from Auburn in this draft. Charles Barkley will be very happy with them, I'm sure. But Dad, let's talk a little bit about the philosophy of the draft in general. We're going to talk, like I said, about Lukas Van Ness next in the same episode, and then we'll talk a little bit about the rest of these players as we go. But Dad, for a philosophy in general, it seems like we got same old Packers, defense, premium position on defense in the first round, who's a young, big, athletic guy. And then day 2, they hit pass catchers, they hit offensive weapons, as they are like to do.
They're trying to hit their second round wide receiver gold again.
Yes. And then day 3, rounds 4 to 7, I think in recent years, this is actually more of a trend. I feel like in the past, they were just like, hit athletes as hard as we can. But I feel like recently, they have been kind of bending their athletic thresholds a bit the later, like, within the draft that they go. And I think an example of that, to me, the reason that I think that is, like, Karl Brooks. Not a very good athlete testing-wise, but the production is so special that they were like, hey, we'll take a shot on it. Is there anything structurally within the way that they drafted that struck you as interesting in that way?
Well, I think one of the things that they're looking at, it seems to me, for depth pieces in day 3. Get kind of flyers who could be adding depth and maybe develop into something. Though they did before try to get, somebody like Shamar Jean-Charles, this guy who was played very well at Appalachian State, I think it was. Didn't test that well, but they were like really excited to bring him in when he was available. Though he has not yet been able to put it together at the NFL level.
And that's why I view Karl Brooks as a bit of the Shamar Jean-Charles of this class, where it's like, hey, not an elite athlete, but had some really good tape, plays very physically, very hard, small school, and they were just like, hey, it's late. It's the 6th round. We'll take a shot on him.
Yep.
And then philosophically, I think some other pieces of interest in this class, they took 7 offensive players, and not one of them was an O-lineman, which I don't even know the last time they didn't take an offensive lineman in the draft.
I meant to look back at how long it's been, but it's kind of interesting. So no O-line drafted. I think a lot of people are like, well, they could get one in the first round. And I thought well, they always get some, so they'll take some athletic flyers on day 3. They didn't do that either. But based on like Gutekunst's own words before the draft, when his brother's like, we've got 13 offensive linemen, so it shouldn't have been that big a surprise based on his kind of an almost dismissive kind of, well, like loaded. We don't need to get any. But despite that, and knowing that quote, I still thought they would pick 1 or maybe 2, and that was when they had 11 picks, not 13.
Well, the thing to me, if I could just add really quick, is for the offensive line. I think most people who thought that they would be taking a tackle in the first round were not thinking that it was a pick for this year. I think most people were like, hey, we're probably going to move on from Bakhtiari after this year, just based on timelines and like how old he is relative to the rest of the core, and that whoever they drafted in the first round, if they were to draft a tackle, would then be the starting tackle for the rest of time. And it's possible they still might have gone one of Paris Johnson Jr. or Darnell Wright if they had fallen to him. Both those guys end up going 6 and 9 respectively. They had, I think, meetings with Darnell Wright and went to see Paris Johnson Jr. at the Ohio State Pro Day, and seemed to have a lot of. They talked to quite a few tackles throughout this process, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. And it seems like they weren't interested in this year depth along the O-line. They were interested, I think, maybe in long-term starter along the O-line, and that's why they didn't take any like late round guys.
Right. What I had is, does this mean anything for Bakhtiari and Nyman? No, probably not. And it was either going to be a guy who could start really quickly, or what's the point? We've got Caleb Jones, we got Rasheed Walker, we got Sean Ryan, we got developmental guys already deep in the bench who we like their upside already. Do we need to add another to that room and have to carry so many? We'll see. And they did bring 1 or 2 more UNFAs, I think. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be they've got a lot already. And a lot that they wanted to carry last year. So,
and if you had to ask,
if they didn't have somebody jumping all the way to the top of the line, then I guess they weren't that interested.
Well, here's the thing. It's like, also, while we're on this topic of offensive line, and I don't want to dwell on this too long, but it's like, who do you think is the lowest on the totem pole in the offensive line right now? I would say it's probably either Sean Ryan or Caleb Jones. And are they really going to like a guy they take in the 5th, 6th round more than these two guys who have had a year in the system. One guy who was drafted all the way in the 3rd round, and another guy they used a 53-man spot on and kept him around all season because they were worried another team was going to take him. I think that's
it's kind of my opinion on that would be you take a guy you think has a chance, and then they get to camp, you're like, oh yeah, this guy's better.
Is that Anders Carlson you're talking about? Oh, we're gonna have time to talk about all these picks later. We're gonna talk about these guys. Philosophically, though, one more thing I wanted to talk about, and then if you have any questions for me, hit me. But what are your thoughts on them not taking a safety until the second to last pick that they had? I know a lot of people on Twitter were not happy.
I was expecting 2, and a couple of guys that I thought were chances. I did not like the day. I did not want to take a safety in day 1, and I wasn't too sure about taking one in day 2 either. Though I think one guy we liked, Jair, a couple we thought a little bit about, Sidney Brown and Jair Brown.
Jair Brown went in the 3rd. I can't remember where Sidney Brown. I think he might have also gone in the start of the 3rd.
I think they may have both been day 2. Yeah.
Yeah. Jair Brown went to the Niners, and Sidney Brown went to the Eagles. Is all I remember.
But then there were some flyers that I thought they would take more than one just lottery ticket, because the probability in this class of somebody being really good is not high, so you maybe take a couple of them, see if you increase your probability. But also, I think the probability of a star in the class being worth a higher pick, like day 1 or day 2, it just wasn't worth the draft capital.
Yeah.
And what you would miss out on by picking one. So I wasn't surprised they didn't pick one earlier, but I was a little surprised they didn't try 2 day 3 picks on safeties. And part of that, well, that was even before they added 2 picks. I mean, I was going to say they did take a couple of positions I wasn't expecting, but they added 2 extra picks. So
wow. Yeah, and the thing is, like, the one thing I will say though is, like, the guy they took, Anthony Johnson Jr. A lot of people I would say that I've listened to have that as one of their, like, best picks of the draft and had him more of like a 4th, 5th round grade.
A lot of people were in podcasts were very high on him. So maybe they've got somebody who can compete for a decent number of snaps.
Yeah, I believe Ben Fennell said he wouldn't be surprised if Johnson Jr.'s in play for that starting safety spot. Other people I've seen have been like, hey, he can't play deep safety, and you still don't really have a deep safety on the roster. But we're going to talk all about the specifics of the safety position in a later episode.
Right, we'll go into more of a deeper dive of Anthony Johnson later.
But I kind of felt similarly. It's like, hey, you could force the pick. Maybe there's a guy. I liked Jair Brown a lot. Sidney Brown was interesting despite the tackling issues. But it was a bad safety class. Don't take bad players because you feel like you have to.
But there were some guys I thought were worth a try. I mean, we didn't really know what J.L. Skinner's athletic testing was.
Yeah,
because of the torn pec. I thought they might take Jordan Howden.
He went.
He went like, was it 4th round?
He went a little earlier than
projected. I was expecting.
Yeah.
Mapu, who they had in for a visit.
He also went earlier than I expected.
Quite a bit earlier. The linebacker, safety hybrid.
Yeah.
Went quite a bit earlier.
Out of Sacramento State, and just went I want to say in the 5th round.
Oh, it's earlier than that.
Yeah, and I think he ended up going. He went 76th overall.
Yeah, I was thinking it was 3rd round.
Yeah. It's like,
so he went
much, much earlier than I think they thought he was. Same with Howden. I mean, these are guys they had in for visits that they clearly had some interest in pieces of this safety class, but maybe once those guys that they liked went way earlier than projected, they were like, hey, it's like, we're not going to pay a premium price for a guy we like but don't love, you know?
Right. The guys they had some interest. They had an interest probably in like 6th round or one of their 7th picks, but not 3rd or 4th.
Yeah.
They weren't willing to give up who they would get those picks for those players. And so we ended up with one.
Yeah. And so while we're talking about safety, I can keep vamping on this forever, but I guess just one other question I have is, after this draft, we're kind of getting to the point where the roster's getting close to finalize. The players that are on the team now are going to be the ones mostly that are on the 53 when the season starts. Considering that, and like they just don't have a lot of money to add free agents also. Considering that, besides safety, is there a position group that you are like most worried about in terms of like how it's going to perform in 2023? Because for me, I'll go ahead. Just if you, I still have some concerns about tight end, although it's not like they could have done anything else. It's just young tight ends often have hard time contributing right away, but they did what they could at that position. And then more importantly, D-line, I feel like they picked a lot of tweeners. They don't really have many true D linemen. Like they have the three they originally had in Kenny, Devontae Wyatt, and TJ Slayton, and then they have Chris Slayton as well,
and Jonathan Ford.
And Jonathan Ford, yes, as well.
They have basically two beefy guys.
Yeah.
330 plus in Slayton and TJ Slayton and Ford. And then a couple just over 300, and then a few just under 300.
Yeah. They have quite a few tweeners. They have like Colby Wooden's a bit of a tweener. Carl Brooks is a bit of a tweener. He's like real D-tackle size, but he didn't really play really D-tackle at Bowling Green. And I just have concerns about the depth there in terms of like experience and actual playing D-tackle. Is they don't have a lot of actual D-tackles.
One thing I'd comment on, so when we're talking about the draft as a whole philosophy, I would say they picked three different players to fill in snaps at both D tackle and edge.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is they took guys who can play D tackle, but they didn't take any true D tackles. They mostly took third down sub guys who are gonna pinch in and pass rush. Like they didn't take any real run stuffers.
No, they didn't take any. There's not a single run stuffer in here.
Yeah.
But so they took guys who have taken snaps on the edge and inside at the college level, and they think they can be.
And most of those inside snaps though were like third down rush the passer. Like they don't have true D tackles like stopping the run.
No, they don't. But I think they thought they needed snaps at both, and they took three guys who could do both.
Yeah, and besides safety, that's like the thing I'm worried about. I'm a little worried that like the lack of safety and lack of like run stuffing D line is going to give Joe Barry.
They're going to give up 200 rushing yards a game. What are you worried about?
I don't know. Just something just doesn't quite feel right about that. I'm just worried about Joe Barry having an excuse after this season is done. And it's like, hey, I didn't have any safeties. What do you want me to do? It's like, well, you had safety.
Said on air. We have high expectations for this group.
I'm not sure why though. You don't have any safeties. We've seen what happens when you don't have any safeties. I've seen the defense with Kentrell Bryce and HaHa Clinton Dix. I've seen what it looks like. It doesn't look pretty. And honestly, your safeties might be worse this year than they were then. You're trotting out Rudy Ford and Darnell Savage. It's not great. You're gonna have some. I think you're gonna have some problems keeping a roof over the top of the defense. But that's just my opinion. Is there anything else for the?
There's also when we talk about like the run game. The safeties last year
were abysmal at tackling.
Were one of the contributors to the bad run defense.
And while
a fairly large contribution actually to the bad run defense
I was going to say. And the thing is, like, while Amos was definitely taking a step back last year, he's still one of your better tacklers in the secondary. He's still your best tackling safety. It's like the guy making all those tackles now is going to be Darnell Savage, and he can't tackle.
Did you say making all those tackles?
The guy attempting all of those tackles now is going to be Darnell Savage, and he can't tackle.
They haven't shut the door on Amos yet.
No, they haven't, and that's something I was discussing with a few people about. Like, after this draft passed and they only took one safety, and the fact that Amos still hasn't signed anywhere, I would be more than up for like a like bringing him back on like a smaller deal. It seems like there's not a whole lot of interest in him around the league. I know there was like a massive cliff last year, but I'm willing to just run it back because he's better than their other options. I know some people are like, well, he's going to stop like the players behind him from developing. I'm like, have you seen the players behind him? I'm really not that I don't think the starting safety in 2025 is on the roster, folks. I'm going to tell you right now. I don't think they're there. I don't see them.
That's the chance of that is very low.
Yes. So I'm really not concerned about
a
Yeah.
vet to a 1 year deal. So the other thing is like the Browns safety. What's Johnson?
Johnson Jr. Yeah, or Johnson the third.
Um,
Heck,
he's still out
we
there
would
too.
have Johnson Jr. and Johnson the third.
There
That'd
we
be kind
go.
of fun. That'd be kind of interesting. But my point is, like, if you bring Amos back, someone said the concern was he's blocking other people from developing. Who is he blocking? Like, I'm not really that worried about it. Is there anything draft wide you want to talk about, or should we go into our first prospect breakdown that we've ever done officially on this podcast and talk a little bit about edge rusher Lukas Van Ness out of Iowa?
Iowa.
Do we
So
think
he's got to practice as Lukas Van Ness.
Iowa? Iowa. Do we think he'll do it?
Iowa.
Because I think if he did that, he would
absolutely hilarious.
He would immediately
he would do that.
He would immediately win over the entire state of Wisconsin and Iowa.
He would be a fan favorite instantly if he did that.
Oh yeah, Lukas Van Ness, Iowa. But do you have anything else about the draft as a whole, or do you want to talk about Van Ness?
Let's. I think we've gone over sort of the big picture, and then the other individual players we'll talk about later. So let's go on to Hercules.
Let's talk about Hercules. Who puts the glad in Gladiator? Hercules. Anyway, I will refrain from doing any renditions of songs that might get us copyright. Way up. That might get us copyright stricken. Careful, the mouse is gonna come get us.
Don't mess with the mouse.
Don't mess with the mouse. But our first prospect breakdown, we're gonna talk a little bit about who is he, physical profile, production profile. Talk about what scouts thought about him and what the Packers seem to think about him, and just talk about our initial impressions of him. But Dad, so with the 13th overall pick in the NFL draft, the Packers selected Lukas Van Ness, edge rusher out of Iowa. What was your initial reaction when this pick was made? I just want to know, both of us were not super high on Van Ness coming into the draft, but I would say, due to an immense amount of homerism and copium, we are also very high on him now. But honestly, I think that, like, I don't mind going first, actually. Can I go first? I'm already here.
Sure.
I'm already on my podium. I jumped up here.
You're already first in line.
I took your spot. Okay, I believe there is a video out there.
Why are you blocking?
Where I said, ugh, gross, when they took him. And I think, for me, my initial reaction was a lot at the time, based on the fact that I thought that the value at receiver at that spot was better than the value at edge, and that picking a receiver there and an edge in the second round would be a better use of resources in terms of where the board was slated to fall.
And what I would say about resources in that regard is the value of the player over the sort of replacement player you would get later in the draft.
Yes, but here's where I was. So that was what I was thinking when they initially made the pick. I wasn't a big fan of it. However, I think with the knowledge of what they did on day 2 and getting 3 weapons in the passing game on day 2, I think that kind of assuaged some of my worries about the pick and value. The other reason I wasn't super high on it on first pick was he is a very, very, very good athlete. There are pieces of his athletic profile that we'll touch on in a second where they're not quite he's elite at a lot of things, and then there's 1 or 2 things he's kind of poor at. And so I didn't put him in that same elite athlete tier as some of these other prospects in this class. I put him in that just a tiny step below that. And so to me, that was something where I was like, is that going to translate when he's not in his instance? It's like his vertical jump was bad and his broad jump was just okay. And so is that kind of lacking that kind of explosive nature in his jumps going to be an issue for him going forward? And so that was my initial thought. I was a little underwhelmed with it, but I think with the knowledge of what day 2 brought, I'm a lot more excited about it. And with watching him a little bit more, we'll talk about that in a bit. Some of my concerns were, I would say, I was a little less concerned with some of what he can't do and more excited with what he can do after watching him a little bit more intently. Dad, what were your initial thoughts on it? And then how would you like to walk back your initial thoughts? Because I thought I did a great job doing that. I just want to see what you can do with that.
Are you moonwalking?
I moonwalked beautifully. Did you not just see that? That was amazing. I was a pro.
So my first text, and so there's a record of it. When I think I texted you, it was predictably uninspired, I think was my first text.
You
And
sound
then
like
something.
the villain from Ratatouille when he is tasting Gusteau's food.
Oh, Anton Ego.
Yes, that's the
Yes,
one.
yes. Predictably uninspired. If I don't love it, I spit it out.
but what?
And I
So
also wrote
yeah,
they could have traded back if they wanted to make a pick like that, and then I ended with I sure hope he's a stud and can play inside and out. So one thing I said about being able to like trade back, what a comment on it, the thought that they could have traded back and still gotten them, which is what was my first knee jerk reaction. After the Packers picked, New England immediately traded back with Pittsburgh, who then took Broderick Jones. And there are several people who are using that bit of evidence that, oh, New England wanted him too, and so they knew that, and so they couldn't trade him back and still got him. But that's not the only explanation.
did
I
you
heard people
see?
say that, and one thing I said as an alternative explanation is that New England had the trade with Pittsburgh set up ahead of time, as long as Broderick Jones was still there. And the speed with which that happened makes me think that that's more likely than, oh crap, we just lost our player. What are we going to do? If you want to see what happens, what it's like when that happens, just watch what happened to the New York
The
Jets
Jets at
after
15.
they got sniped for Broderick Jones, and they almost didn't get their pick in on time.
Well, have you seen? I've seen many teams, and by many, I mean one additional one, being like, oh yeah, the Patriots were going to take the guy we took. That's why they traded out. I saw an article today saying the Lions were saying that the Patriots are going to take Jahmyr Gibbs, and that the reason they took him there is because the Patriots are going to take him, and clearly the Patriots wanted him because they traded out of 14. I've seen every team who took a slightly questionable pick see like, no, the Patriots are going to take that guy. They traded out. Like, what are you talking about? But
Yeah, so
not to compare, like not to compare the picks at all. The taking Lukas Van Ness way better than taking a running back in the first round. Please don't compare
yeah.
the two.
So I think part of my kind of, I don't know, blase reaction to it was he was one of the earliest players that were sort of mocked to the Packers um, before we knew a whole lot about any of them. It was like, I would say Lukas Van Ness and Michael Mayer were maybe the two earliest players mocked to the Packers in the process, like, 2 months ago. And so I think that affected the opinion of him at the beginning. But after watching more tape, I'm a little more excited about what he's able to do on
Well,
field.
let's talk a little bit about what he's able to do, because I think there are a lot of things to be excited about with him. There are definitely some things where, hey, he's not 100%, he's not like a perfect prospect, no one is. But let's talk a little bit about what makes him a good prospect, what makes him a bad prospect, what there is to be excited about, what there is to be not excited about. And let's start that off with his physical profile. And I think one of the things that's the most exciting about him is just how, like, exciting an athlete he is for his size. So for Lukas Van Ness, he came out of Iowa this year. He is also, his age is very exciting. He's only 21.8 years old, so he's going to be 22 at the start of the year. He is 6'5", 272 pounds, so he's massive, with 34-inch arms and 11-inch hands. So really big arms
hands
and massive hands. The part of his profile that I spoke about being a little concerned about is that his jumps were not amazing. Just a 31-inch vertical and a touch over a 9-foot broad jump, which are around like the 40th.
Well, 9'10". It's almost
9'10". That's true. It's almost 10. It's almost 10. Sorry. I misread. I thought it said 901, not 910. A 9'10" broad, which is almost a 10, which is still it's very good. It's not elite. That's around like the 77th percentile ish for like that position, and the vertical is a little below average for the position. However, where he makes up for that, like those drills not being as good, he is crushing everything else. 40-yard dash, 4.58, with a really elite 20-yard split and a really elite 10-yard split, and then his short shuttle. 4.32, which is elite, and then 3 cones 7.82. 7.02. They do the zeros with the diagonal slash, and my eyes didn't like it. 7.02, which is also elite. And one player that compares to him very favorably in terms of athletic profile is Preston Smith. And when you watch him, you see a lot of Preston Smith. Wouldn't you say, Dad?
Yeah, it's like how much of it is close, like the height's within 3/8 of an inch, the weight's within 1 pound. Um, Van Ness is faster, um, quite a bit faster in the 40 and faster on the splits, but not as good of a jumper. Is 3 inches um, less in the vert and the broad, but and they're kind of equivalent in the agility drills. Preston slightly better in the shuttle, Van Ness slightly better in the 3 cone, and Preston was able to put up the bench 7 more times, so significantly more reps with the same length arms, both 34-inch
Yes.
arms.
Yes, both
And as
34-inch
you
arms.
see, Preston out there, you just see how good his reach is and how much it
Yeah.
helps setting the edge.
You can.
And
I
Van
think
Ness
that's his. Hmm.
has even bigger hands.
Oh, much bigger hands. It's like a whole half an inch bigger. But the thing for Van Ness and Preston though is Van Ness is like lean as you can get for 270 pounds.
He's got a 6-pack at 272 pounds.
There is a reason they call him Hercules. Like
they mostly call him Hercules just because of the way he looks.
That too. He looks
like a marble statue.
He looks like an Adonis. Like he looks like an actor. Like he does not look like a football player. I would definitely not be surprised if he gets accused of being a pretty boy every now and then. But he's far from a pretty boy, because the third thing they showed on NFL Network when we picked Van Ness was number 1, football highlight. Number 2, football highlight. Number 3, straight to the hockey highlights. Because
and it's something that Andy Herman has talked about a bunch. Like he likes like, oh yeah, this guy got a lot of hockey penalties. That's a good thing.
He did get a lot of hockey penalties. I don't know if it's a good thing.
That's not exactly the profile of a pretty boy.
He's not afraid. That's where I was going with. It's not the profile of a pretty boy. But the hockey thing was funny to me because I was like, can you get any more Wisconsin than just throwing on his high school hockey highlights and being like, yeah. But the thing that I will say for that, as we transition into more of a production profile, is that he did get a late start to football. He did not start playing football until 2018. I believe that would have made him 16 years old. So like his junior year in high school. He was mostly a hockey player before that. So late start to the sport. So he is not really a finished product at all in terms of what he could be at the next level. In fact, as we go through scout quotes later, you'll notice a common theme that a lot of them are like, best football is ahead of him. Not half the player he can be. Best football could be ahead of him. Like that's a very common quote, not just from like scouts who do like NFL media, but also like the Packers front office, as we'll talk about in a bit. But that's kind of just to put some of this production stuff in light, and that, hey, like he's doing all of this while only playing the sport for 3-4 years. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on with his athletic profile before we talk about production, Dad, or do you want to take it away on production?
We could start talking about production. There's also usage, but the athletic profile, I think we've covered most of it. I mean, he's in I guess 90, 95 percentile in a lot of the metrics.
And I guess the only question I have is, so for me, the lack of vert and the like above average but not elite broad jump were a bit worrying to me. Did they worry you at all?
I mean, a little bit. I mean, you try to think about like how fast can somebody like get out of the blocks and launch sort of force into the opponent. And one thing I would say that I was going to say a little bit is his 10-yard split being super elite. It's actually his most elite trait is his 10-yard split. So that means his get off is very fast, even if he's not able to get like airborne so well.
Yeah, and the thing is
able to get a quick reaction off the snap.
Yeah, and the thing is like when you watch him play, there's no problem with the get off. Like
he is quick at the snap.
There's a few times like where in a 2-point stance he'll kind of like rock back and then go forward is like the false step thing, but they'll work on him with that. Like I said, he's very new to football.
Right, a little wasted motion there.
Also, we'll talk about production in a second, but yeah, so that was my main concern. But the fact that the 10-yard split is so elite, and the fact that you don't really see problems with, I mean, he is pretty twitched up, and I don't know if you see like his like back foot when you watch him play, his whole back leg is twitching when he's shaking when he's lined up to go. Like you can see the whole thing is just like tick 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 tick,
tense like a sprinter.
Yeah, he's wound up. Like he's like a springy athlete.
He's just gotta be careful he doesn't get drawn off sides a bunch.
Yeah, that's the thing with, and like I said, very young player, only gonna be 22 at the start of the year.
Aggressive.
Exactly. Better to have him pull it back. But let's talk a little bit about his actual play. We'll start by talking about like where he lined up. But the one thing I want to touch on here is I am going to start a narrative, Dad. And I know I didn't tell you about this, but I'm starting a narrative. Did you know that Lukas Van Ness played the most snaps at edge for his team last year?
I have a little bit of a thing on this towards the end, so we're going to start talking about this now.
So this is what I'm going to start the narrative, Dad. I'm not even going to mention the he didn't start games at Iowa, because I feel like people are just going to remember that. The first thing I'm going to say anytime we talk about Van Ness is, did you know he had the most snaps at edge at Iowa? Because I don't care that he didn't play the first snap of the game. It doesn't matter to me.
I have like the exact same thing. It's a little bit later, but yeah, he played starter snaps.
Yes.
He had i.e. he played more snaps of the position than any other player on the team, regardless of being labeled starters. He just didn't line up on the first snap of the game.
Yeah.
People who talk about him not starting there's a stupid take. People who are not actually looking at it, I'm going to just plain call it stupid.
Tell us how you feel. Tell us how you really feel. Well, here's the thing is like, it's just like, it's a number I think people see, and it's like something they first point to. And I think also it is a bit of a meme at this point. Like people know it doesn't mean anything, but everyone just says it because it's kind of funny.
But the problem is the people who know it doesn't mean anything, who are saying it ironically, are mixed together with the people who are saying it genuinely.
Yeah, that's the problem there. But that's why I'm starting the narrative. It's like, did you know that Lukas Van Ness had the most snaps at edge of anyone? But what was it? The other thing I believe I heard today was, actually, I don't want to quote it without being 100% sure. So ignore what I was just saying. But he had like as many pass rush, as many snaps as a few other first round edges over the last 2 years, where it's like, yeah, he didn't start, but he's playing as much as these other guys, so who really cares?
I heard somebody talking about this today, and I don't remember.
I think it was like Nolan.
Locked On.
I believe it was Nolan Smith. He played like almost the same amount of snaps as him, or the same amount. I don't want to misquote.
There were a few players who had more snaps than he did. I think like Will Anderson.
Will Anderson,
one of them. I mean, like 1,500.
I was gonna say he's played like 600 more snaps than anyone else. So
yeah, and so he's way ahead of everybody else. But
and then I think Tyree Wilson had more, but
not that far behind.
Well, let's talk a little bit.
The crowd of everybody else. He's kind of in the crowd of everybody else.
Yes. So listeners, if you hear that he didn't start a game at Iowa,
right,
either ignore it. Or educate them and tell them actually he played more snaps than anyone. The starts don't matter. But let's talk a little bit about those snaps, Dad. And let's talk a little bit about, first, where he was being used at Iowa. Because I think a lot of times people have listened to people talk about Lukas Van Ness. They talk a lot about his versatility. So Lukas Van Ness really only played just reasonable amounts of snaps in the past 2 years, 2021 and 2022. And he played inside much more as in his just 2 years ago than he did last year. Do you want to take us through this usage a little bit?
So like in 2021, the vast majority of his snaps were actually played as an interior D lineman.
Yeah. Pretty much between the guard and the tackle. Pretty much between the guard and the tackle exclusively.
In the B-gap. Yeah, the vast majority. Had a few in the A gap, a few outside the tackle. And then this year, his highest number were actually as an edge rusher outside the tackle, but still, what is it? Like a third of the snaps are actually interior over the A gap or the B gap.
It's between a third and
the tackle.
Between a third and half. Like it's closer to a half than a quarter.
So this is what I talked about earlier, that in some ways, and I think the Packers are probably thinking this, we can kill depth at two positions with one stone.
And something that's... Go ahead, sorry.
And that's something that may develop a little bit more later. It'll kind of depend and I think I have a note of this later, but since we're talking about it, I'll go on. Um, I think early on with Gary out, he's probably going to do a lot more edge than inside. Though he'll also do, and then when Gary's back, he might start doing more of his snaps, kind of maybe the same total number of snaps, but then shift more of them to lining up on the D line, like a 3 tech or something, instead of on the edge, since they'll have more depth at edge at that point when Gary comes back than they'll have um, top level inside.
Yeah, and I mean, they're going to be a bit like strapped for depth along the inside either way. But I think the ability to have that versatility, like you said, he has experience playing majority of snaps as an interior D lineman, so he might play a majority of his snaps kind of on the inside this year. Although Brian Gutekunst did say in his pressure they see him as an edge who can kick inside. Like, but as an edge was like a important part of the question. It was like, he is an edge for us. We think he can be like Zadarius Smith. We'll talk a little bit more about Brian Gutekunst's pressure, but we think he can be like Zadarius, where he kicks inside on third downs or in pass rush specific downs. But they see him as an edge. In terms of that usage, though, it's very exciting because we know it's super valuable at the NFL level to have 4 pass rushers on the field at once on third downs. And with the ability to slide Van Ness inside, having a pass rush potentially of Preston Smith, Lukas Van Ness, Kenny Clark, and Rashawn Gary, I mean, that's 4 potentially premier level
really
guys
nice.
attacking the passer. And for Lukas Van Ness, he was quite good rushing the passer this past year for Iowa. 46 pressures and 9 sacks on 271 pass rushing snaps per PFF, which is a 17% pressure rate, which was 30th in college for players hitting 50% of pass rush snaps. So still very, very good. That's a lot of players in the NCAA. So that's
Right,
pretty
and some
elite.
of those players are going to get some much lower competition.
Much lower competition. The Big Ten is pretty much the second best league in all of college football. And Dad, we have a bit of a chart here talking about him as a D tackle, comparing him to other D tackles in this class. And do you want to break that down? Because he is a force anywhere you line him up.
Right. So this is a little analysis from, I think it's Sports Information
Sports
Solutions.
Info Solutions, yes.
Sports Info Solutions. And so they have been putting out like top 10 prospects at some of the different positions over a few metrics. So they've done like Mike linebackers, nose tackles, D tackles. I don't know if they've done an edge yet, so I didn't get a chance to like compare him to the other edges, or if they have it, I didn't find it. But they have Lukas Van Ness here as a D tackle prospect, and so they've got a couple. They've got pass pressure. They've got a pressure rate, which is pressure either above or below expected, determined by the type of down it is, distance, down, score, and the type of play, quarterbacks drop, and so they've got a pass rush metric based on like pressure rate above expected, and then 2 run stop metrics. One is basically clogging your gap. Do you force the runner to go in a different direction from the design gap because you're in it? And then also average tackle depth. So for the pressure rate, he was second among all the D tackles in the draft, only to Kalijah Kancey. But he also did well in the run metric. He had
they call it forced bounce percentage. I believe
forced bounce. Yeah, I guess that's what I was supposed to say. Forced bounce, and he had the best among the top 10 tackles, D tackles in forced bounce percentage.
Yeah.
So he was the second best in the pressure rate and best in the forced bounce.
And rate. If you notice, do you notice the 2 other players that are in that top 5?
I noticed, yes. Number 3 for the pressure percentage is Carl Brooks, who the Packers also have, but he's not doing so well in the forced bounce.
Don't worry about it. It's a passing league, Dad. And then number 5 is Colby Wooden, who the Packers also took
for the pressure.
So maybe they were just copy paste that graphic and said we're drafting these guys. Find them. But yeah. So the thing with Van Ness in terms of a production standpoint is, it seems like very solid against the pass, very solid against the run, a very well-rounded player that plays all over and can do a little bit of everything. And for people, I think, do we want to talk about like our impressions of watching him first, or do we want to let's how do you want to do this? Do you want to talk about the scouts quotes, or do you want to talk about our impressions of watching him play? Which do you want to do first? We can do it either way.
Let's jump to ours.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we thought watching him, since we're talking about production, and it kind of dovetails into that nicely. And then we'll talk a little bit about what media scouts, etc., thought about it. But for you, when you were watching him, what did you feel? Because I don't mind going first. For me, like I said, going into watching him, I was kind of concerned. Was not a prospect I was super high of in terms of profile. I personally think that like the jumps are really important for pass rushers. Because that explosiveness is really important to get the first step and to get essentially force moving in a direction, and your lack of ability to have elite jumps shows your lack of ability to really like get a quick instance of force and a quick instance of momentum, like from a standstill, which is important when you're pushing the passer. But then when you watch him, and it's like, yes, he doesn't have a lot of moves, which is one thing, something a lot of people said about him, and he relies a lot on power. However, to me, I initially thought that might be a negative. When you watch him play, though, I think watching him have success against Paris Johnson Jr., who went 6th overall to the Cardinals, and the Cardinals traded up to get to be their left tackle forever. When you watch him go against Peter Skoronski, who went 11th overall to the Titans, and they're going to try and make him be their left tackle or left guard forever. And you watch him just physically, like, not every snap, obviously, those players are elite players, but when he hits the right notes and he's just so much physically stronger than him that he is barreling them back into their own quarterback butt first, or he is flattening them, or his hands are so heavy on them that he is shocking them back 4 steps and he's getting to the quarterback, I think it made me realize that, yes, oftentimes a edge rusher who relies only on power and like mainly on a bull rush, because that is his main thing. He is mainly a bull rusher at this stage. He does have a nice long arm. He does have nice speed to power, but a lot of this is just like go through the face of the guy. And for a lot of players, that's not going to work. You're going to need something more refined at the NFL level. For him, though, I think the strength and the play strength specifically, I know he didn't have a great bench. I don't think that's a great measurement of strength in my opinion. I think his play strength is something where that's a special elite trait where he might just be stronger than everyone else on a football field. And it might not matter if for the first year, all he can really do is long arm and bull rush, because he might just be that much stronger than these tackles he's going against. Because he was going against top level tackle prospects and he was way stronger than them. So what's he going to do when he's going against mediocre tackles? I'm imagining he'll at least have a good strength advantage there as well. So that was the positive for me. In terms of like negatives, it's the same as what a lot of people say. He is mostly just bull rushing. It works for him at that level. Will it work for him for the next? I'm of the mind after watching him go against those players that yes, it will. The other thing is he does fall over from time to time. He gets off balance at times. I would say he like gets so caught up in the bull rush that if they kind of, in basketball you'd call it pulling the chair. You'd probably call it the same thing in the NFL, but he leans way forward way too fast and falls on his face. And that's like the negative for me watching him. And I mean, he's only 270 pounds, so he's not going to be like a great, like 2-gap guy, but he can take on double teams. He's not bad at it per se. He's got really good, like functional, like strength, like I said. But Dad, what did you think about him? Because those are my main takeaways. Like, I was a little worried about it just being bull rush, but he might just be so damn strong that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think one of the things that this kind of touches on is the idea: does a player have an elite trait or ability that they can then win with? So rather than what he can't do, what can he do? And can he do something at an elite level that allows him to make plays? And I think that's the power. So after rewatching his tape a little more, so especially against some of the Ohio State reps against Paris Johnson, his power is really effective when rushing the passer. And also saw, maybe it was against Penn State. I can't remember who the other team was. But one thing I noticed that he does, especially in the inside, is he'll do a bull rush basically by driving one shoulder into the chest of the offensive lineman. And basically just trying to collapse the pocket from the inside, especially when he's inside. He's just trying to collapse the pocket, which is kind of what you want to do, is like You take away the ability of the quarterback to step up when you're rushing from the inside.
Yes, and it counts as a pressure if you're collapsing the pocket. You don't necessarily need to get past your man to collapse the pocket. And
yeah, you just push the blocker into the quarterback's lap so he can't step into the throw, and he gets flushed out. And then it's easier for the edge rushers to get him. So I think
can I ask one question about collapsing the pocket?
Sure.
So Brian Kudigan specifically noted, and this was in his one-on-one with Larry McCarron after his official presser, that he thinks he's able to collapse the pocket and quote unquote apply the kind of pressure that wins in the league. Do you think that collapsing the pocket is like what they're because with an edge rusher like Gary, who's also a big bull rush guy who's going to just push his tackle back, and with Van Ness, who's a pocket pusher, and with Clark, who's a pocket pusher, do you think their goal is just like, hey, we're just going to make the pocket as tiny as possible? We don't really care if they're getting by them. We're just going to have guys that go through people's faces.
How do you uncrunch? Did you ever So that's what they're trying to do, is the crunch guy.
Yeah.
In Incredibles 2, they're just trying to take the pocket and crush it
as much as they can.
And I think they do like this philosophy. I think it's why, and I think even good consensus on liking bigger edge rushers who can then also hold up against the run and have some flexibility to go inside. That by just collapsing the pocket. So first, I think a lot of teams like to pressure up the middle so the quarterback can step up and the edge rusher. But also eliminate escape lanes if you're simply crushing the pocket until you can like grab the quarterback and rip him down.
Yeah,
or just knock him over with the tackle or the guard, and so that there's no way for them to scramble and run out.
And this is just a guess for me, but with the like heightened importance of mobile quarterbacks in the NFL, you could see a scenario where speed rushers are less in vogue because they need to go so wide that they're creating these massive rushing lanes. They're creating these massive rushing lanes for these quarterbacks if they go that wide. And it's just something that I've thought about. I don't know if you listened to Chuck Pagano did a really nice film analysis of Lukas Van Ness for the 33rd Office, which is a YouTube channel on, and they did great work. I've tweeted it out from our Twitter at FatherSonPacker. And he's saying essentially the number one need in his mind for an edge rusher is, can you set an edge? And I think that's kind of plays into their how much they like Van Ness and how much they like these bigger edges.
Yeah, and I'd say that Van Ness has a couple of tools. So he's got the power ability up the middle, and also just to drive the tackle back, either the center guard or tackle, to push them back into the lap of the quarterback on a decent number of reps. Because, you're being elite, and if you get 30%, so you're not winning. It's like a baseball batting average. You're elite by succeeding like 30% of the time.
Yeah.
So you're not getting to the quarterback every play, but so he's got the bull rush. I think in some cases, like you see him driving the offensive lineman like a blocking sled. He's just full power, leaning into it and just pushing the guy back. But he's also got some speed. You see if he gets stymied or a stunt to then loop around the outside and still get to the quarterback on a number of occasions with speed.
And can I just say, in terms of chasing the quarterback down, I mean, he has, this is going to sound so like NFL scout speak, but he has a great motor. And the 3-cone, I think, really shows up like when you watch him try and chase down a quarterback that like has like evaded him a little bit, because he is stopping on a dime and he is hustling after him. Like if the quarterback starts to break contain, he's like changing direction and just sprinting after him as hard as he can. I think Packers fans are going to be a really big fan of him. I think he's going to be a fan favorite for years to come. Wearing 90 is going to look great. Do we want to talk a little bit? We're getting a little long here now. Do we want to talk a little bit about what scouts had to say about him?
Sure, because I already talked a little bit about some of this other stuff about being multi-dimensional. So let's go to what the scouts had to say. You had
yes.
Put in a few things.
So I put in a couple of these because I know some people felt like this was a reach of a pick. I saw that floating around the Twitterverse, and based on the consensus board, it's just not really true based on what consensus was. So I'm just going to go through a few of the bigger scouts around the league, say where they had him ranked, and then say what they thought about him, just like a little blurb. So Dane Brugler of The Athletic had him 10th overall on his board, edge 3. He went 13th and he was edge 3. Quote, overall, Van Ness needs coaching up, but with his pass rush construction and overall pacing, or needs coaching up with his pass rush construction and overall pacing, but he is an ascending player and competes like a grizzly bear with his fierce power and explosive twitch. He has the upside of an impactful NFL starter with inside-outside versatility, regardless of scheme. So don't take our words for it.
Regardless of what you said, you cannot win a match against a grizzly bear.
Yes, someone said that. It might have been me. I didn't say I could. I said a human being could beat a bear, and I found a news article that someone did once. But we're staying on contract. So don't take our words for it. Take these scouts' words for it, because the power is very special. Going on, Daniel Jeremiah of NFL Network had him 14th overall. Edge 4. He went 13th, and he was Edge 3. Van Ness is, quote, Van Ness is a powerful defensive lineman with the versatility to stand up on the edge or slide inside and play over the guard. He is excellent at collapsing the pocket with his bull rush, getting his hands inside and driving opponents back with ease. He flashes a chop move and a rip move, but needs to develop a more diverse repertoire. His best football is ahead of him. And then McShay of ESPN had him 15th, Edge 3. Also talked a lot about the power on his tapes standing out. And then Mel Kiper of ESPN did have him 27th, and PFF also had him 27th. So a couple had him late first round. Most of them had him in the teens, right outside the top 10, right where the Packers took him. So it's not really a reach. And one thing that you'll see in all of these scouts' profiles is so many of them say his best football is ahead of them. And that kind of takes us to a little bit about what the Packers think about him. Because Brian Gutekunst has essentially a press conference after the first round, and he talks also later after the entire draft about the entire class. But about Van Ness specifically, here's some quotes that he had to say about him that we found interesting. He was asked to compare essentially Van Ness and Gary, and said he's a little different from Gary and has more experience inside, but he saw some of the comparisons that they were making. And spotted that actually he views him being seen a lot like Zadarius Smith, where he's going to play a lot of edge and then kick inside on key downs. He also said, quote, the best football's ahead of him. So a lot of people seem to think he is an ascending talent. And beyond that, some very interesting things. Thinks he's able, like we said, apply the kind of pressure that wins in this league was a really interesting quote in my opinion. They expect him to play at his current weight of like 272, but does say that guys his age, he's still a younger guy, do sometimes tend to settle into a weight a little bit higher, like 10 pounds heavier, I think is what he said. But they're not going to have him gain any weight on purpose and like try and size up to D tackle.
And he also said that he did not see him really being able to slim down to play like exclusively edge because he's got very little body fat.
Yeah,
already.
Exactly. Was there anything else from what Gutekunst said that really stood out to you? Those were the main hits to me. Is like he's really excited about the size being versatile. They're going to play him as pretty much a true edge. This isn't a D tackle convert pick, and that they're going to use him like Z essentially.
Right, an edge rusher with some probably passing down interior defensive lineman versatility, maybe like a stand-up nose or something like that, like Z would do on occasion. And that he also said, just interesting nugget that not necessarily related. Like somebody asked, and I couldn't recognize all the voices in the audio, about whether picking so many defensive players was intentional or not. And he said, "Oh, it's just the way things have."
Defensive players in the first round.
In the first round, that is, specifically. And Gutekunst said that wasn't necessarily intentional, but there are high expectations on the D.
Yes.
This year.
Which is interesting. Did we talk about this? Or do we talk about this before we start recording or when we start recording about the high expectations on defense? I think we were recording. And I said, I don't know if there should be. They don't have any starting safeties. We're already getting a little long. I'm already forgetting what we talked about at the beginning of this. I think all seemed like he was their guy. And I think Gutekunst also said that he was who they had in mind when they swapped with the Jets.
Or one of the players they had in mind.
Yeah,
that was, I think, what the quote. He was at least when somebody asked, he was one of the players they had in mind when they requested the pick swap with the Jets to get to 13.
Yeah, which interesting. Maybe the Patriots would have taken him, like we said earlier. Maybe not. Who knows? We've already talked a little. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying. So, kind of wrap up some of the stuff that kind of tied to earlier, what you're saying about the quotes and sort of his value. So he was the third edge taken overall.
Oh yeah, so let's talk a little bit about value of like where they took him. I'm just prefacing what we were going to talk about and what they maybe could have taken instead, whether or not that's exciting. Oh, and just my like closing thought on him as a prospect that I realized I forgot to say when we were talking about what we thought of him when we watched him. I think for me, I just won't ever be upset at taking a guy at a premium position who's an elite athlete in the
young.
first round and young. Um,
One of the first comps I saw after he was picked, you saw we were talking about the Raz comp with Preston. Somebody tweeted out, and I did. Sorry, whoever you were, I didn't see comp to Bosa.
No, thank you.
That's a pipe dream.
Yes, it's the reason he wasn't a top 5 pick. There's a reason he was not a top 5 pick.
If he ends up anywhere close to Bosa or say like TJ Watt, then he's the best value in the draft.
Yeah, that's 100th percentile value. Like, that's the most value you could ever get at the 13th pick. And I know JJ Watt was picked around there, but like, let's calm down. But yes, you were talking about value at that pick and maybe what else they could have done. And like I was saying, I felt a lot better about the pick after they were able to get the weapons they got on day 2, because it pretty much meant taking an edge there didn't really preclude them from getting Jordan Love some help.
Yeah, so one thing to think about, and I've tried to do this for all the picks, is how good the choice was, and of course, how good the choice is depends on what else you would have done with the pick. So he was the third edge taken, and so that was in line with several of the draft experts. It was after Anderson, Tyree Wilson, and then Van Ness, and then the next edges after him were Will McDonald at pick 15 by the Jets, who I think they weren't quite ready to make a decision after Jones was gone. And then Miles Murphy was the next one after that at 28 to Cincinnati. So in general, so if you thought, okay, players they could have had instead would have been Broderick Jones, who went next if they wanted to thought he was an elite tackle that could be, the next 10-year plan, or the draft crush of us and many others, Jackson Smith-Njigba, that they could have had, who ended up going till 20, so quite a bit later. So if they picked Jackson Smith-Njigba, then they would not have had a first-round edge rusher. And they would have had, so by the time that the Packers were on the clock again at 42, the 9 edge rushers had gone. So if they had switched, so by picking Lukas Van Ness, they ended up with their first wide receiver they took was Jaden Reed, who was the 6th wide receiver off the board. So they got the number 3 edge and the number 6 wide receiver. If you flipped it around and say, okay, what if they take it JSN? They would have had the number 1 wide receiver, but they would have ended up with like the number 9 or 10 edge rusher.
Yeah, because we went through it. It was Anderson went, Wilson went, Van Ness went, McDonald went, Murphy went,
Nolan Smith went,
Anajike Uzama went, and then 2 more, which we talked earlier. But yeah, they would have had around the 9th or 10th edge rusher, and that would have worked out to
Isaiah
like Foskey
and BJ Ojulari.
Yeah, and they would have ended up essentially with either you have JSN and like one of Foskey, Ojulari, or Adebare, depending on who you liked, who ended up going way later than we thought, all the way in the 4th round, which was probably one of the more interesting things of the draft to me. Or you end up with Van Ness and Jaden Reed. And time will tell which of the 2 are better, but essentially those were the 2 things, the 2 differing styles of thought on how this draft could go if you were someone who believed they should have taken JSN at 13, which we were definitely initially.
Yeah, but I think in terms of draft history, probably the gap between the number 3 edge rusher and the number 9 edge rusher is bigger than the number 1 wide receiver and the number 6 wide receiver.
I would say that's true. More premium position,
And so then you would say that looking at history and what was there, that maybe we have to admit that the Packers made a good choice here. Even if it wasn't our plan at the time.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think, like I said, I'll never knock them for going for a premium position who's young and an elite athlete in the first round. That's why I wanted them to take Jackson Smith-Njigba. I was a little upset they didn't, but I understood the pick. There have been times where I've not understood the pick. I'm not going to call anyone out, but there were times I have not understood the pick. This was one where I was like,
there were times this year where I didn't understand the pick.
Yes,
but this wasn't really one of them.
This was not one of them. I understood it. And I think that's the most we can say. I think I'm really excited to watch him play because I think he's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, I think it's going to
And
be a fun. It's going to be a fun.
it's going to be a fun Packers year this year, and I'm going to have so much fun watching all of these rookies, and we're going to break them all down for you in the coming weeks. Next week, keep an eye out. We're going to be talking probably about the tight ends, maybe about Jaden Reed too. We'll keep you posted on our Twitter, and we'll tweet everything out. Don't you worry. We'll be tweeting out videos we find interesting of these prospects, scouting reports we find on YouTube, such as the one that Chuck Pagano did, which I found very interesting and enlightening, and all kinds of stuff like that at Father Son Packer. Come follow us there. If you like what you heard today, come subscribe to us on YouTube. It would really help our numbers. Come subscribe to us anywhere you can find podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon. Dad, is there any last thing you want to hit the listeners with before we get going?
Well, one thing I just wanted to add, it's kind of a big overview. It's kind of remarkable how quickly the Packers seem to be remaking their roster into a much younger roster of the sort of cohort of players about the same age to move together into the next phase.
Together, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that it's especially interesting on offense, where we're going to have a young core for the first time in what feels like forever.
Yeah, I mean, the receiver core has 7 players drafted in the last 2 years on it right now.
It's going to be exciting.
And those are their top 7. Those are their top 7 receivers.
Yeah, and it's going to be really exciting. And we're going to be talking all about it. So come give us a follow. Come give us some more listens. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.